In a previous video, we've created a scaffolding for our horizontal feed component. We've copied the entire structure, the HTML structure of our feed, and pasted it within the component wrapped with the template tags. Now our script tags only export default module, but there's nothing inside of it yet. If we go to index.html, you'll see that we've replaced the entire template with just horizontal feed tags. In this video, we are going to learn how we can feed data into our component. And to do this, we are going to use props on our object. So when we export in this object, this component, the first thing we're going to ask for is going to be some properties. And in order to do it, we use this props keyword, colon, and then set of curly brackets. Let's quickly have a look at our template. What sort of data we might need for our feed? First of all, we definitely are going to need some string for this header. We will need all of the records that we want to scroll through, as well as the duration of each item. In other words, how long is the item going to be visible until it switches to another one. Okay, so let's go back to our component here, to the script section. And for the properties, we're going to start with this duration. So duration, and duration will be of the type number. We want this in milliseconds. This property will not be required. So I'm going to set required set to false, because we are going to specify default value as 7,000 milliseconds, which will give us 7 seconds. So by default, each item will stay for 7 seconds before it's being changed to the next one. Okay, so that's the duration. Next one will be header, and I'm going to scroll up a little bit. So header, and header will be of the type string, and then it will be required. So required set to true. Then the last item will be collection, I'm going to call it. And what sort of data type this collection may represent? Well, we can either pass data as an array directly to the component, or we may pass a string representing the URI, the endpoint to which we want the component to make a call in order to obtain the records. So we are going to type, and then we are going to specify an array of types, which will be either array or string. And then we are going to set it as required. So required true. Okay, now if we compile our component and all the other assets, once it's all done, if we preview everything in a browser and open the developer tools, so more tools, developer tools, there we go. And if I open console after refreshing, you'll see that we obviously have some warnings here. First of all, it tells us that required property is missing, which is the header. So that's the first one. And the other one tells us that we're missing the property collection. It doesn't squeak about the duration, because duration is not required and it has its default value associated with it. Okay, so let's go back to our index.html. And for this horizontal feed tag, we are going to start with the header. I'm going to say it needs to be a string, so we need to put single quotes in between these double quotes. And in between these single quotes, we are going to say breaking news, for instance. Now, if we save it, go back to the browser, refresh the page, and as you can see, this first warning is now gone. We only have this one for the collection. And for the collection, I'm going to bind, so again, colon and collection. And for the collection, I'm just going to pass an empty array. And let's quickly see in the browser if this warning is now gone. Obviously, sorry, before we actually do this, we need to compile everything again. So let's just quickly run npm run def. And once it's all done, if we preview everything in the browser, refresh the page, and as you can see, all warnings are now gone. We obviously didn't pass any records, we only passed an empty array, but it's what this component is requiring. It just says that we want an array or a string. So if we were to replace this array with just an empty string, and if we now compile everything again, so npm run def, and if we now preview it in a browser, refresh the page, you can see the error does not show up. It doesn't matter if it's empty string or array, as long as it's the right data type. Now you might have noticed that I've used dynamic properties. If you're not familiar with Vue, dynamic properties are the ones which allow you to pass data that when changes outside of the component, it automatically updates inside of the component. So if I was to have another component which wraps this horizontal feed, and something within this main component has changed data that is being passed as a property to this chart component, this horizontal feed, this data would automatically, this change would automatically be reflected within this horizontal feed. We could also use static properties by removing this colon at the beginning. And by the way, dynamic properties can also be written as v-bind colon and then name of the property. But personally, I prefer to keep it short, so I'm going to remove this v-bind. Now, header, in fact, could remain without this colon at the beginning, could be just a static property, in which case we can remove this single quote wrapping this string here. Now, for the collection, if it was only to be a URI, the endpoint which we want to call in order to obtain the data, then we could also make it a static one. But because we're going to accept two different data types, one of which will be an array, we're going to use this colon here because array would be automatically converted into a string. Static properties are only representing strings. The same would apply for the duration. If you want to pass the duration as a number, it would be converted into a string. So we would have to also use dynamic property binding here. So for the header, I'm going to keep it as a static property, which is going to represent a string. But for the collection and duration, which I'm going to actually add, I'm going to keep both of these as dynamic ones. So duration, we're going to set it to, let's say, 5,000 milliseconds, making it 5 seconds. Okay, if we preview everything in the browser after we've compiled it, so I'm just running npm run dev again, and then if we just go to the browser quickly, refresh the page, everything should still work just fine. As you can see, obviously header is still only fetched from within the template. We haven't actually replaced anything, even though we are passing data to our component now. Our header still remains the same, but if we want to change it now, before we actually move to the next video, let's just quickly do it from within the template. Now I'm going to remove there's this header here, which is within this span tags, and I'm going to use the vtext directive here, and I'm going to say header, which is going to point directly to this property. So we are using this property directly within the template now. Now, if we save it, again, we need to compile everything. So if we run it, and then if we preview everything in the browser, just a few seconds, there we go. If we refresh the page now, you'll see our header is now replaced with what we passed through as a property. Now, before we move to the next video, let's quickly install a Vue extension for Google Chrome. So we go into More Tools, Extensions, and let's scroll down, Get More Extensions, and I'm going to search for Vue, hit Return, and what we need is this Vue.js DevTools. Add it to Chrome, add extension, and now we have it available for later on. Okay, we're going to be using this extension because it will allow us, if we now open actually DevTools, if I just go to More Tools, Developer Tools, refresh the page, and as you can see now it's automatically activated. If I go here, you can see we have root of our document, and then we have this horizontal feed, and it tells us what properties we have and what values are associated with these properties. So you can see collection is empty, duration is set to 5,000, and header is breaking news, which is exactly what we passed through from our index.html. And these things will change dynamically when we actually going to be building our component. You will see later on. Okay, let's move to the next video.